Good morning, good afternoon, LinkedIn. Welcome to another edition of Let's Build here with a special guest today, Kevin Mead from Airbond. How you doing, man? I am fantastic, especially when I get to talk about quote to cash topics, which we're definitely talking about here. And let's just dive right in if you don't mind. I'd love for you to kind of just share the story of why we're even, talking about this in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. So today we're talking about quoting inside of HubSpot, but at the end of the day, quoting is just something that's incredibly important to a business, right? It affects every single business, and my business is, no different there. I was using proposals in a bunch of different tools prior to using HubSpot, and I actually lost a deal I really wanted, and it took me a little bit aback, and I was like, okay, what do I do to solve this for the next time, and how do I make sure I win this deal? So I actually ended up spending like 10 hours on a weekend just looking into how to rebuild my proposal, and I decided to build it inside of HubSpot. And so what I ended up doing was I used the new quote filter feature that had come out to customize my proposals and make it that I could really quickly, make these well-designed proposals inside of HubSpot. So what happened was pretty awesome. Was my close rate jumped pretty aggressively. It went from 17% to 31%, and I was really excited about it. It ended up, giving me some extra cash so that I could get to, a place of hiring more team members, and just overall was a pretty big win. But it all came from building quotes inside of HubSpot. And so I wanted to go through, what that looks like, how to do it, and a little bit more detail as we get into it of why you would do this.
Yeah, no, that's a great story because this is just like another one of those things that when we can systemize it, we can, understand what's happening and not take for granted, steps in the process, whether it's a form, it's an email, it's a quote in this case. There's often an assumption made, like, especially in the case of quotes, like, oh, they said they were bought in, they said they're going to buy it, they said this. So naturally, I don't have to worry about this quote. It's just transaction. They're going to click buy. They're going to sign it. And then they don't.
Yeah,
Right?
and that sucks.
Yeah. And then when you take a step back and you think about it's not closed until it's closed, they're not converted until they're converted. So just like you would take a step back and say, hey, why is my form not performing better? Because there's too many fields on it, because it's hidden on this part of the page, because it's unclear. That stuff happens with quotes all the time. Like you bury that button on the bottom, or you don't describe the thing that they're buying because you just talked about it. So why do they need that stuff? Well, maybe they got to share it with somebody else. And now they've got to explain it, and they explain it badly. So now they can't move forward. So all these things I know we're going to get into today, but just a great, kudos on your part for taking a step back and saying, hey, maybe we can do something differently here.
Yeah, for sure. And, contracts are an area where people just assume like it's exactly the way that it is, right? And it can be, adjusted so that you're showing, the right stuff, like you mentioned, and bringing in the right decision makers and describing your products the way you want to. So without further ado, I'm happy to go through, the process of building a custom quote and show mine as well, if that sounds good to everyone.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I'll start by sharing my screen. Get a window. All right. So I'll start here. Can everyone see kind of my proposal screen?
Yes, we can.
Cool. So this is the quote that I whipped up together in that 10-hour period of just building inside of HubSpot. I ended up taking, so a little bit of honorable shout out as well. I built this in HubSpot. That was the tool I used. I then took a proposal course from Donald Miller and went through like just how to do the copy.
Amazing
So
course.
yeah, and so I'll just go through this skim just as a skim, and then we'll go through like the process. But basically, setting the vision up top, giving some visuals, and then giving a breakdown of the process of working with me, just showing, gonna design your HubSpot out in a lucid chart. We're gonna set up your core hubs. We're gonna train your team and build dashboards. So giving these visuals really helps teams, figure out, the value of what we're doing. Then we do. One sec, my screen went black. Then we'll do basically like what the. Sorry. Okay. We'll go through what the process is of, interviewing customers, mapping the flow of data, doing implementation, and doing maintenance. Then I, spell out like what's the ROI of investing in a CRM, and then we finally get to a statement of work where it writes down everything that's included. I also include, a testimonial wheel so that our clients can see all the testimonials that we have and trust us. And then finally, have just some case studies as well underneath it, followed by actual purchase terms. This testimonial wheel ends up helping a lot and helps build a lot of trust. So really a big fan of that, and happy to go through how to build that.
Yeah, and before we dive in, I'd love for you to share, like, when you took that course, what was the main switch that happened in your mind?
I think the biggest thing was outlining a process. I think that was a big one. I'm a marketer in like all my main jobs. I'm a developer by trade or by training, but I think the biggest thing was just because it's a proposal doesn't mean you don't need to like sell the vision. And so a lot of people will just whip up a quote that has just the we'll show some examples of the default quotes inside of HubSpot, where it's just like, here's the price, here's what you're buying. But I think the main switch in this one was, you have to sell the vision, which is what we're doing all up here. And then from there, you need to break down in very simple terms what the process is of working through stuff. So a lot of it is, just building trust in the process and making sure people know that that it's easy to do business with you.
Yes. Yeah. They're constantly re-inviting and reassuring of the story, that these people are joining and making sure they see themselves in it. And that's where we're going beyond, hey, here's the scope we talked about. Here's how much it is. Look forward to doing business with you.
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
And we talked a little bit earlier about, needing to bring in multiple decision makers, right? Like a lot of, I'll send this quote to maybe a head of marketing, right? But they need to get the CEO and COO bought in. And so that's another person getting the link, more or less. And so what that means is that if it doesn't have this information, that person's just seeing me as a cost. Where if we have information, we have, stuff for them to read and go through, they'll actually be able to understand what that head of marketing is buying, which is really important. And one of the recent quotes I worked on solved one of those problems. So happy to talk about that as well.
Yeah, and that's a great way to put it. And whenever I say things, which I'm starting to say more, it's like content first approaches to the whole journey. Largely, the reason it took you, I would imagine, 10 hours was at least equally about the copy and the text and how it flows and the content generation side of this. Like, I'm sure there was some dev, not as much as everybody probably thinks, and we're about to see that, but the content generation piece, if you don't have that, which the more you delegate this out to other people who aren't the founder, right? That's most of the story here, is the content itself. So that's when I say things like content first approach to sales, the quote is often one of the things, that can benefit the most from content.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, this one was not super dev heavy in general because it's a little more static. I would say that testimonial slider and getting it set up for mobile was a big one. But I have some more like dev heavy ones that I can talk about a little bit later as we like get over the basics and explain why I did some more dev heavy stuff with some of these quotes. Um, so does
Awesome.
it sound good to go through just what the process is to build one of these?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So inside of HubSpot, there's typically a quote here, and so this is basically just a sandbox. I mean, actually, let me switch to a different one real quick. Um,
Yeah, and I'll say as you're pulling that up, like our goal, and we hope your takeaway is today, like there's two decisions that need to be made. First is that treating your quotes like this, like in a way that the story has to still be told, you're still trying to sell the vision, is step one. And then step two is understanding that you can do this in HubSpot if you want to, right?
yep. So finally found a dev account. So typically, inside of HubSpot, you can go to the navigation bar and go to quotes, and you'll have basically a list of all the quotes that you've generated so far for specific deals. Typically, people do this from the deal page, and there's you put the line items on, you build the quote from there, and I can go into more detail, but to customize it, you typically need to click actions and click customize quotes up here. I'll show just like a typical quote first so that I can just kind of show the existing process. So if you were to just like get HubSpot out of the box, you would be able to create a deal, and then as you're about to sell that to a specific client, you would go in and you would find this quotes on the right hand side and click add, and you would have these options on the quote template for default modern, default basic, and default original. Um, you know, converse to what we talked about earlier, this is really just the price, right? And it just doesn't show much else. You can customize some pieces of it, but at the end of the day, you really just are showing costs to the client, which is great if you're just looking for something out of the box. But if you're looking to customize something a little bit more, what you can do is you can go back to that quotes area and you can click this actions, go to customize quote templates, and what you'll see is you'll see the 3 default quotes that are set up by HubSpot. And you'll see down here, I have some customized quotes because I probably already started this process on this sandbox. But what you'll want to do is you'll want to start, I typically like starting from the modern just because it has a lot of the things I already like out of the box. But you'll want to click edit theme. Actually, I am wrong here. Give me a sec. Let me go back.
And that's a good point to make. Like, half of the battle is understanding that you very rarely have to start from scratch when trying
Yep.
to build the stuff that we're talking about. And this is one of those things that when you think about customized, and this is something I've learned recently, the difference between like customized and configured, right? You have these tools available to you in HubSpot that if you start working from them first, now there's always going to be scenarios where it's better to start from scratch. But I think in cases when you're trying to learn how to do something new, build proof of concept, starting with what's already there can often help you understand how and what's available to you to start building out, your final vision.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And starting with some of these quotes, can be great as like something that's moving. You're starting with. If you are just looking to like customize on a base level, you can just click this customize quote button, and you can choose. Again, I like the modern, so you can choose that, and then make like some more simple adjustments. There's also this tool that's called it's a proposal by Flow. That I see clients use that all the time just as a starting point, and that's really well set up. I like doing it from scratch because it's just what I'm used to. But what I'll do is I'll choose this modern, and what you can do on this left-hand side is that if you really are just looking for, small adjustments, so you're saying, I don't want any comments, I'll just hide that. Or I want to, on the quote, put, something static here, you can change that to, sample proposal. Those are things that you can just do by clicking that customized quote template. But if you're looking to build something a little bit more custom like I was looking for, you can click settings here. You can scroll down to the bottom and click edit CMS template. And you'll see this thing that says, hey, you can't adjust this because this is HubSpot's, and you need to create a child theme. So what you'll do is you'll just click create child theme. You'll name it custom proposal.
And as we move through this, you're going to notice that if you're familiar with CMS on the Content Hub side of things, we're going to see a lot of similarities, but it's not 100% the same thing. Hopefully, over time, we can see HubSpot kind of, bring down some of these silos. But another added benefit of using the HubSpot tooling is that when they do, like, for example, if you know that this contact property exists on your contact object and you want to add that to your quote, like it works just like the rest of the system where you can grab that token and put it in the place, that you want it, because you're using the base tool set of HubSpot to do this, customization or configuration.
Yep. Yeah. And that can be pretty powerful as we talk about some dynamic quotes that I've made for clients, because you need to get some of that data on the deals, the existing products, everything like that. So once you build out this child theme, what you'll want to do is you'll want to right click here, click reveal in Finder, and you'll just go back to that original one. You'll right click it and click clone to child theme. You'll click your new child theme that you made and click OK. And so what's cool now is that if you go back and you look for your child theme that you made, which is going to be down here, you'll see that now you can edit this. And so now what you can do is you can change stuff on the code side to make adjustments. So, in the other situation where you want to hide certain things, you could just go and delete it. It's usually best to just hide it so that it's still there. But this is where you're able to make some really big changes. And what you want to do before I talk through how to make a quote really dynamic and really useful, is you'll want to go into customized quote templates, and you'll look for your child theme. So you want to look for that custom proposal, and you'll want to choose the modern one because the other ones we didn't make a clone for, so it's going to default to the prior version. So here you'll just click modern, click choose, and now as you edit that code, this will change and this will adjust. And so in this case, I'll just call this Arabond custom proposal. And so what's cool about this is that you can make some pretty major changes on that code side to make a proposal that looks pretty good. And so given that HubSpot has web proposals versus just PDF proposals, you can add some web elements that make your proposals look a lot better than a typical proposal, and that's where you get things like the slider I showed earlier. One thing that I've had difficulties with other proposals is that as we have more testimonials, we can really only show 5. And so what's nice is in this case, the client can just look through an unlimited amount of testimonials, and that just builds more trust. So that is just one example of something you can do that's a little bit more custom.
And this is a great case of like, there's often situations where people think they know about the HubSpot tool. But then over the last year or two, HubSpot has made significant progress development wise and making it easier and adding functionality. Whereas if you haven't been to quotes since like 2020, uh, you think it's not very useful probably, or it's like bare bones, and you feel like you need something like a Deal Hub or all these proposal management softwares that could give you these nice web pages and bring all this content in. That's where they've developed it to. Now, we're not talking about CPQ at all here. It's just about how can we make a nice looking, online quote with all the content that we think, will help close the deal, right? We have that capability now.
Yep, yep, and yeah, and that's where you have some opportunity as well. Honestly, the reason that I learned quotes, I'm pretty sure if I'm looking at the timeline, it wasn't immediately for myself. It was for a client, and it was because they had these really complex MSAs, so master service agreements. And what ended up happening was that they were spending a ton of time trying to get quotes out to customers, because the MSA could change based on what their existing contracts were. And so what we needed to do was, in order to use HubSpot, was to set up a system where it would read the existing deals of that customer and adjust so that it showed the right addendum and set it up in the right order. And the reason that we did that was because you can't really do that in a PandaDoc, or you can't really do that in a DocuSign, because they don't have that information of the customer for you. Like, they don't have that they've ordered. They have 3 active subscriptions and one is going to end in a month. And so that ended up being a big use case that I've seen a lot, is when you have kind of those renewals or those addendums and MSAs, HubSpot can be really powerful for it, because it basically just takes the entire guesswork of, oh, which subscriptions is this customer on, so I can actually get a quote. And that just makes the team, trust the system more. They feel like it's actually helping them, and they want to, track that a little bit better, so your data gets better. And that's been
Yeah.
a really strong use case that I've used these quotes for, and it's something I don't see offered in other, contract tools.
Right. Yeah. And two things come to mind as you say that. Like, one, this is one of the like countless places where making sure your association labels and your relationships between objects, when you get that right, you unlock like a bunch of tools in HubSpot to work for you. This is one of those tools. And as you were describing that MSA situation, like, and we were talking about what it takes to create a good proposal earlier, I know there's teams out there that know they need to be doing this content based stuff, but they have to spend so much time on the T's and C's and the MSAs that they just can't even think about doing any extra work to make the quote look good. They just got to get that part right. It takes them way too long to go through these 45-page documents. And like, now you can just token up the company name, token up the address, token up all the properties that you need to be, loaded in there. And I'll say a third thing, like, oftentimes teams will feel like, oh, this is just a complex document that we don't want to automate. There's too much risk. It should never be a situation where we're not going to replace 100% of the manpower required right away, right? We just need to start somewhere. So even if it's like one property and then we get to 10 properties, we can show that any part of the document that is static every time, we should not have to touch that ever. And if we can at least start there, like we're already like miles ahead of where we've been.
Yeah, yeah. I think something you like, hit on that I think is important is more or less your team's like decision fatigue, right? When they're spending a lot of time making decisions on things that are like could be done by, a process or a computer, they're, getting exhausted, and then they're not able to make the important decisions. The things like, is this price the right thing for the customer so that they can, they're going to close, right? And so, as you, but the tough thing is that, your system can't really make those decisions unless it has the same data your team has, right? And so, if you don't have these processes and you don't have the right way to collect that data, then your system's going to be useless. And that's a big reason that I am like really passionate about building quotes out for customers, is not particularly because it's better than using another proposal software. I think it is, but a lot of people have different opinions. When I face that, I usually end up coming back to is like, hey, how accurate do you feel your revenue is inside of HubSpot? And the answer I always get is it's not up to date. Our salespeople are not keeping it up to date, and they have no incentive to. Well, if you make something that helps them save time, get a deal closed faster because they're not waiting around to get a contract, and they can't put something on that contract that's not true because it's what the customer sees. Well, now you have super accurate data, and you can unlock a lot of potential for just how your system runs. So
Yeah. And now
quotes are
we're empowering like handoffs between teams because nobody's misinforming or being disingenuous during the process accidentally or otherwise. And but you bring up like another nuance that I think, especially if you're an admin or you're sales ops or rev ops trying to implement this, understand that directly or indirectly, this for the people that do have to spend all of their time doing MSAs manually right now or other things related to quotes manually, they see this first and foremost as a challenge. They could at least as a challenge to their role at the job, right? That's where like that's the last thing we want to do because they also have all the customer knowledge and they're the ones best suited for all the content and the massaging and the creation of all this stuff. So now if we remove that piece from their plate, they can actually take the time to provide real value to the organization. And sometimes as the ops leader, you need to help the team as a whole understand that. And the sooner you get that understanding, the easier this process becomes. I personally had to learn that, the hard way after spending time implementing and then getting feedback later on, about how people saw this as a risk to their job. And similar to automation, it's like, no, you guys are actually the valuable people with all the customer relationships. And we need you spending time on that, not on this manual stuff.
Yep, yep, for sure. What else would be helpful for me to go through some stuff? I can kind of talk about how to customize a little bit more, or I could also talk about some of the stuff I've put in place to make CPQ a little bit easier for salespeople. Happy to talk about.
I think it would be helpful. I'm definitely interested in that piece, but also just sometimes it helps just to see the tokening, that's happening and how easy it is. Because once you have this set up, and I learned this, as we were delivering, client-facing portals for CMS, and once you understand all the tools involved, those people that I was just talking about, maybe they're there and they've done 10 quotes in a row, and they're like, man, I wish this thing was different. And all it requires is like a new property on the record, and you can literally make it happen without any developer help within like a 5-minute, period. And that's where you can see we often like see a wall of code and like run in the other direction. But we try to empower the users, the ones that are responsible for how this stuff looks. Like if they can just see very clearly, like this is how like the properties are listed, right? And if you want to add a new one, here's the information for that. This is how you plug it in. Now they're really managing their own system. And for me, that's the power, of HubSpot. When you can get there, now, even as a partner, the relationship becomes, you know, developing new and improved things and not like fixing things or not asking for, hey, can you just add this property real quick, to our quotes? Like there's stuff like that is much more easily trained than people think it is. And most of the time, the stakeholders will love to be able to do that stuff themselves, right?
Yeah,
Because that's way more efficient and way more effective.
yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I'll walk through that. So obviously, to set up a new property, you got to go to the settings on the right-hand side, go into that gear, and then click on properties right here under data management. Typically for a quote, you probably have it on the deal, a new property. That's the best place to be just because it's more accessible. You don't have to go through multiple deals. It's going to be one deal to one quote. On contacts, it's going to be one quote or like multiple contacts to a quote. So if you can set it on the deal, you click create properties. And so I'll actually take one of my clients that I just worked on. In their case, they were looking to add like key concerns. So basically what the customer is focused on and concerned about in the company. And for them, we did a multi-line text, and then we just clicked create. And so from there, what you can do is you can go into your quotes, click edit, and then go to, I'm going to do it, let's see where I want to put this. So I'll just put it in one of these free text areas. I'll put it underneath the comments for right now. But basically, if it has that big A with the lines, that means you can add some stuff into it. It's a free text area. So what you can do here is you can click personalize, go to deal, and then type in key concerns. Oh, I got to load it one more time.
Yep, definitely. As you're creating new properties, I always recommend you're going to have to refresh the page wherever you are otherwise.
There we go, key concerns. So I'll just put default value. The company is focused on hiring. And then we'll click that. And now you'll see that property right there, which basically says that, as it gets filled out, it'll get pulled in. So I'll just run one of these real quick to just show that process.
And in those cases, so when you're using rich text, areas like that, you don't even need internal name. You don't need all the stuff that, like, you don't need to worry about APIs, like any kind of background stuff that you're used to having to think about, maybe in HubSpot past, but definitely in most of the other systems that you have to work with. Just all of this stuff goes away. And this is when you can understand this, usually until you experience it yourself, it's very hard to get this to click. But once you do, you just start to understand, like, okay, I can do rich text fields over here. I can add these properties to HubSpot. That means I can put whatever I want on the quote, right? And if it's a thing like key concerns, there's so many like strategic questions that get asked during the sales process that just usually are just left out of the system in email inboxes, in conversations, that if we bring them in, and the sooner we bring them in, now it's always there. And, it gives everybody else an opportunity to work from the same information.
Yeah.
Right? And that is just so powerful in removing all these gray areas where stuff goes wrong.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I find myself, I just hired a sales team member, and I find myself filling out the deal description for that same exact reason, where it's like, I just need to explain everything on my head right now. I'm
Right.
going to stay
And
there.
I love that example because when we think about like challenges to user adoption, especially on the sales team, this you need to explain the why usually, but when you can tie it to something, especially like quotes, like whatever you put in here, like you're not going to have to rely on anybody else to retype into the system. You're not going to have to explain it because so often when we're working on a Word docs and Excel sheets and we wish this other team would just, it'd be nice if they paid attention to costs and this thing and that thing. Well, first of all, you're not paying enough. You're not paying them enough to do that. But also, if you have a system like this, right, available to you, you're just creating, manual error opportunities or miscommunication opportunities when you don't have to. And a lot of this back and forth is where teams right now, they might not be asking for stuff like this because they see that as like, part of their job, right? So as a partner, once you understand that there's an opportunity for this in HubSpot and they have access to it, this is often one like a surefire place to get them to feel immediate value from using this platform. And when you can show them things like you just described, like this is why you're going to love filling out the deal description now that you never did before, because now it's right on this quote where you want it to be. Like now they start filling out the deal description, right?
Um,
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and like that's the cool thing too about it. And it's just like, I've used this thing like a switchblade almost for a bunch of different use cases, but I've done it for customer handoff too, where it's like the customer success team says, we need all this data or we cannot onboard this customer, and it's going to take our time like an extra week just getting it all from the customer. And so it's like, okay, well, who do you get that from? And they're like, the salesperson. And it's like, okay, why are they filling that out after the deal's closed? And so what I've done in the past is put some of that information on that mandatory step before quoting, and then it adjusts the contract so that it's a little bit more clear. It paints the picture of what onboarding looks like for that customer, so that they can see, similar to what's on mine. Here's what we're going to do, and it ends up helping the team fulfill faster, and solve that communication error. And all it took was just having data in one spot. So same thing with with the line items too. Like you can add data here on each one of these to adjust the quote and show you're going to pay now, then you're going to pay the next time. And there's a lot that you can do with the quoting to make sure that data is being tracked the way you need it to, so that you can run the business and automate a lot of key steps.
Yeah. And all of this Commerce Hub, development that's been happening starts to touch on this, like the ability to set up milestone billing and just way more, like if you haven't checked this out recently, there's just way more flexibility than you would have seen, even like a year and a half ago. So I guarantee there's opportunity if you're not using a system for quoting, and you have access to Sales Hub in any capacity, there is opportunity here to improve that process.
Yeah, yeah. There's one of my clients even uses Commerce Hub to do like pilot payments, and then the remainder of the payment, which
Same.
you can do with custom dates and build that in, so that in their case they were manually billing a lot, and now they are able to use Commerce Hub to run all their payments. So there's a lot that you can do with it.
Yep. I have a client that uses like payment links via email to get the first payment. And then, either before or after the quote gets signed, that can happen. So again, since we're doing this inside of the whole customer platform, right next to the CRM data, right next to the relationship, we can do things like if we know that information is needed anywhere in the process, and we're starting to use these building blocks to support storing that information. Like that information you talked about, where we always need to know this and it doesn't get filled out till later. You can even involve the emailing, functionality to say, hey, automatically send this email when it gets to this stage asking these questions that are from, the properties on the record, right? And it's not to take anybody out of the process, which is often a concern, like, oh, I need to have the conversation, right? Usually, like, you might have that conversation and then forget about, one of the 10 questions you're supposed to be asking, right? The email and all this automated asynchronous stuff is just to shore up the process. It's not to remove the human relationships, it's to empower it, right?
Yeah, and it ends up being really funny because it's you think about integrations and they're it takes money to invest in them, right? But a lot of people think, oh, we're gonna just automate it and that's gonna make it faster, and that's true. But what ends up being the thing that like causes the most difference in the company is not that the task takes time. The task could take, like we're talking about, 5 minutes to update something. But among, everything that happens in a business, there's a lot of things to get handled. And so while that person's doing their main priority, they might put something down and be like, oh, this is not my biggest priority in the world. But it could be the biggest priority to another person. And so what ends up happening is that it creates like a lot of friction between teams. They don't trust each other as much because they're waiting on something from the other team and they don't have the same priorities. And something that took 5 minutes now has gone a week without actually being done. And so that's where you have something that really was small just creates a massive rock in the whole process, and it hurts your customers. It means that your customers don't get onboarded fast enough, or they don't get the thing shipped to them right away. So there's a lot of area for improvement just by making that process simpler.
Yeah, and those kinds of delays also, like, I've seen deals stall and then not close after you just had a verbal commitment for it to close, but you can't get out of your own way organizationally, and then the lead time slips because you couldn't put the order in right away, and now the lead time's not going to work, and they've got to think about something else. Like, literally, that happens, and that's where, like, if you're using tools like this, so what you were showing, like, we admit there's lots of situations where a long, 10-page proposal doesn't make sense because everybody's on board. You just got out of a meeting and they literally tell you, as soon as you send that over, I will purchase. So literally the limiting factor is how long it takes you to send a link to them so that they can click the button. Now, you've put time into these different options, whether it's a payment link, whether it's the customized quotes that are built for, selling the vision, but also customized quotes that have a minimal amount of information that make the purchase button like right up front and center, like don't have to scroll, easy to click. All these situations can be, applied to the system in tandem. And when you can do that, now you're truly easier to do business with, right?
Yeah.
In that moment.
Yeah, one thing I do on all my quotes is I go through the process to make sure they look good on mobile and when they're printed, because that's not usually a default setting.
Yeah.
And the reason I do the mobile is because a lot of deals get done by text, right? Sometimes you can close a deal where you just it would take an extra 5 days, but then you just text them and they're like, oh, I forgot, like
Yes.
I had another thing to do, but I'll do it right now, and they click that link. They see the quote in mobile form. It looks beautiful. They feel like you're professional. They scroll down, or the button's right there, and they sign off, right? And so there's a lot of points in the customer journey to buy that you can reduce how long it takes to close that deal just by being intentional about how you're doing it. Um,
Yes. Understanding the journey Um, and I've learned so many times that we start to get in our heads about why they haven't responded, or why it's happening different from what's expected. And so often it's just like, especially when you're relying on emails and attachments exclusively, like, you've seen your inbox. I mean, come on, they might have missed it. And people get busy, and that's where sometimes this stuff gets, when it's real powerful, it's like, all right, we're still on the call. You just told me that you will do this. 60 seconds. Here's a link to pay. Now you can do it on the call and it's done. Right. And
Yeah,
instead, when we can't do that because we let, our accounting systems get in the way, or we just let our process get in the way, we're like, all right, I'll let the team know. We get off the call. We send an email to the, order management team. And now a process that could take seconds takes days.
yeah. I
And
mean, something that's been recommended to me, and I've done a couple times, is to take payment on the call, right, and get that signed, because you have it's a lot easier to close a deal when you're talking face to face, right? But that can be difficult if it's a long process, and your close rate could jump up if it was just easy to whip up a payment link, or you have a template set up so that you just send it on the Zoom call and they took a look and they're like, oh, I'll buy this, move forward, especially for like, more small, high volume deals.
right. Yeah. And just being on the call when they see it, you're there to answer any questions that come up. And it's just like, and it can be awkward, like, for people that are not used to doing that. You just have to remind yourself, like, if they're bought in, especially when you've taken a value-based approach to trying to help them buy your product, when they're bought in and they're trusting, like, they want it to be that easy to check out and to finish the contract so they can move forward with getting the value with you. So they love that experience. They, like, talk about surprise and delight. Like, when you can, they don't have to worry about it after getting off the call with you. So it's not about being, too pushy or salesy or always trying to close. It's literally helping them buy. If they're so bought in, and that, like, any moment of delay, like, can break down the process. So you're doing it on their behalf just as much as you're doing it on your own. So
Um, yeah. Do we have time for me to go through some CPQ stuff? Because like I have something I can show that would like really speak to how you can make things a little easier for your salespeople.
how about, because we're at about 48 minutes now, I think this would make an amazing part two
Okay, sounds
to
great.
this. So if you're
Awesome.
willing to come back, I think that's a great reason to come back. I know a lot of people are interested in that, and I have some strong feelings related to CPQ, and how doing it in HubSpot with the barriers that exist, I often think are for good reason. And when you can kind of see your process from how do we make this smooth, how do we make it easier to buy, you start to streamline the whole thing, and now it's actually easier to set up CPQ like functionality in the first place. So if you're willing to come back, I think that's
Yeah.
a great conversation to have.
Yep. Happy to talk about HubSpot all day.
All right. Well, we will get that on the schedule. And this has been awesome. Definitely appreciate you taking the time today. Uh, so for everybody watching, if you haven't taken a look at quotes, for any partners that have been listening to sales teams complain about anything close to the quoting process, there is opportunity if they're not doing it in HubSpot. So I challenge you to look for that opportunity, and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.